Never thought a Thursday afternoon in March would be the one that split my life into before and after. My son Tyler had just finished soccer practice at Ridgecrest Elementary, and I was parked in the usual spot by the chain link fence, watching the kids spill out through the double doors with their backpacks and shin guards still on. Tyler was always one of the last ones out, 8 years old, a little on the quiet side, the kind of kid who holds doors open for people without being told. I spotted him coming across the blacktop and something felt off before I could even name it. He was walking with his head down, hands stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, not running toward the car the way he usually did. He climbed in the back seat without saying anything. I asked how practice went. He said fine. I asked if Coach Dermott had them work on passing drills. He said yeah. I waited for more because Tyler always had more, some story about who kicked the ball over the fence or who ate it, trying to slide tackle on wet grass. Nothing came. We were 3 blocks from school when I heard him say my name. Not Dad with that automatic tone kids use. He said it quietly, the way you say it when you're not sure you should be saying anything at all. Dad. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. His face was turned toward the window. Can you pull over for a second? I pulled into a CVS parking lot and turned around in my seat. He still wouldn't look at me. His hands were in his lap and he was picking at the Velcro on his shin guard strap over and over. What's going on, Bart? I need to show you something, he said. But you have to promise you won't go back to the school. The hair on the back of my neck went up. Tyler, look at me. He did, and his eyes were the kind of scared that has nothing to do with getting in trouble. Just promise me, Dad, please. Show me first, I said. Then we'll figure out the rest together. He pulled up the right side of his practice jersey, along his ribcage, running from just under his armpit down to his hip. There was a bruise the color of a storm cloud. Yellow at the edges where it was older. Dark purple in the middle where it was new. 2 separate impacts, layered on top of each other. I didn't say anything for a moment. I couldn't. Who did this? He pulled his jersey back down. Coach Dermott. I'd known Warren Dermott by reputation for 4 years. He'd been the after-school athletic coordinator at Ridgecrest for 11 years. The man had a framed commendation from the district superintendent on the wall of his office. He ran a youth basketball camp every summer that half the neighborhood sent their kids to. He was the kind of adult that other adults describe as a gift to the community, which in my experience means people have stopped paying attention. Tyler. I kept my voice level. I need you to tell me everything. He did. Slowly, with long pauses, he told me. It had started about 6 weeks ago. Dermott had pulled Tyler aside after practice one day, said he was working with him on discipline and focus. Started grabbing him by the arm when he made mistakes on the field. Then harder. Tyler said one time Dermott had shoved him against the equipment room wall because he'd forgotten to put cones away. He'd told Tyler that if he mentioned it, his parents would get called in for Tyler's attitude problems, and no one would believe a kid over someone who'd worked there for 11 years. There it was. That exact sentence. The threat that teaches a child that silence is safer than truth. I wanted to turn that car around and drive straight back to that school. Every instinct I had was pointing in that direction. But I looked at my son's face, pale, tight, watching me to see what I would do. And I understood that how I handled the next 20 minutes would either confirm to him that telling the truth was worth it, or teach him that adults lose control and make things worse. I reached back and put my hand over his. You did the right thing telling me, I said. And I need you to know something. I believe every word. He let out a breath like he'd been holding it since October. I drove to Providence St. Patrick's Hospital, which is about 12 minutes from Ridgecrest. I told Tyler we needed a doctor to look at him and that this was a good thing, not a scary thing. He didn't say much on the way there. He looked out the window. The intake nurse in the pediatric ER was a woman named Brenda, older, efficient, the kind of person you want near you in a waiting room. I told her quietly that I had concerns about how my son's injuries occurred and that I believed they were not accidental. She gave me a look that was careful and direct at the same time and said she'd make sure the right people were involved. The doctor who examined Tyler was a man named Dr. Elliot Graves. He was maybe 50, calm, moved through the room without rushing anything. He asked Tyler questions in the way a person asks when they actually want to hear the answers. After the physical, he stepped out with me into the hallway. The bruising pattern, he said, is not consistent with contact sports. These are compression injuries. The positioning and staging suggest they happened at minimum 2 separate incidents over 3 to 4 weeks. He looked at me steadily. I am required to file a mandatory report with Child Protective Services and with law enforcement. I want you to know that before it happens. I know, I said. Please do it. Do you have any reason to believe the person responsible has continued access to your son? He's his after-school athletic coordinator. Dr. Graves paused. Then we'll make sure the report reflects the urgency. 2 officers came to the hospital about 90 minutes later. One was a younger woman who was quiet and took notes. The other was a man named Officer Calloway, probably late 40s, the kind of cop who's been around long enough to have developed opinions. When I told him the name Warren Dermott, I watched his expression carefully. He wrote it down. Then he set his pen flat on his notepad. Warren Dermott, he said. I coached youth basketball against him, probably 10 years ago. Good guy. Really dedicated to those kids. I said, look at my son's ribs. Calloway looked at the photos Dr. Graves had taken. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not dismissing what your son said. I'm just saying we need to be thorough. Mr. Dermott has a long history in this community. We'll need to interview him, get the school's account of things. This kind of allegation can do serious damage to a person's reputation. I asked him what kind of damage it was doing to my son's body. He didn't have an answer for that. He finished taking Tyler's statement and told me someone from the juvenile division would follow up within 48 hours. My wife Caroline had been at a work conference in Phoenix when I'd texted her. I'd kept the message brief. Come home, Tyler is okay, but I need you here. By the time we got back to the house, she was already booked on the first flight out, landing at 11. I sat at the kitchen table with Tyler until he fell asleep on the couch, his head against a throw pillow, one sock half off. I covered him with the quilt from the back of the chair and then went back to the table with my laptop. I'm an insurance adjuster by trade, which is really just another way of saying I find inconsistencies for a living. I started looking. Warren Dermott had 11 years at Ridgecrest. Before that, 3 years at Harlow Creek Middle School in the same district. Before that, a 2-year gap in his employment history that nothing in the public record explained. I went deeper. 3 years back, there was a brief mention on a local neighborhood forum, the kind of half-archived thing that almost no one looks at anymore. From a parent asking whether anyone else had noticed Dermott grabbing kids by the collar during drills. The thread had 2 responses. One said that sounded like a lot and the other said Dermott was old school but well-meaning. Then nothing. The thread died and the original post was deleted. But a cached version still existed in a search archive. I printed it. An hour later I found something worse. A civil complaint filed 4 years ago in Mahoning County, not criminal, civil, by a family against the Ridgecrest School District. The complaint alleged physical intimidation by a school staff member. It had been settled out of court. No admission of wrongdoing. The family had signed a non-disclosure agreement. The name of the staff member wasn't listed in the filing, but I cross-referenced the date with the district's employee records, which are public in Ohio, and there was only one after-school staff member flagged in a disciplinary review during that quarter. It wasn't a name, it was a personal file number. But that was enough to request the full record. When Caroline walked through the door at midnight, she went straight to Tyler on the couch, knelt down next to him, and stayed there for a long time without moving. When she came into the kitchen, her face was dry but her jaw was set in a way I recognized. She's an old nurse, she's seen things. She doesn't fall apart easily, but she also doesn't waste time. What do we need to do? She said. We fight smart, I said. The next morning, Officer Calloway called. Dermot had been interviewed and denied everything. The school district had released a statement saying they were conducting their own internal review and that Dermot had been placed on paid administrative leave pending the outcome. The district spokesperson had used the phrase committed to a thorough process, which I have learned is what institutions say when they are hoping something goes away. I called a lawyer. His name was Franklin Adler, a family law and civil rights attorney whose office was 40 minutes from us. He'd handled 2 other school district cases in the state. He told us to document everything, to not speak to the district directly, and to not post anything publicly. He also said this: if the civil complaint from 4 years ago involved Dermot and a settlement was reached without proper remediation or disclosure, the district has significant exposure, and they know it. That afternoon, I drove to the elementary school. I didn't go inside. I sat in my car in the visitor lot and watched. Dermot's truck was still parked in the staff lot, on administrative leave but still allowed on school grounds. Still within 50 yards of children who had no idea what I'd found the night before. I took a photograph of his truck with the timestamp on my phone. Then I called every parent I knew from Tyler's team. I kept it careful, the way you do when you're trying to find out if something is real without contaminating what people tell you. I said Tyler had been hurt and I was trying to understand the environment. 3 conversations stood out. One mother, I'll call her the first one, told me her son had stopped wanting to go to practice in January. He'd always loved soccer. Suddenly he was inventing stomach aches and begging to quit. She'd assumed it was a phase. She was crying by the end of our call. The second parent, a father, told me his daughter had come home 2 months ago and said Coach Dermot had grabbed her wrist so hard it left a mark. They'd reported it to the vice principal. The vice principal had spoken to Dermot and then reported back that Dermot had said it was an accident during a drill. Case closed. The third was a woman who'd been at Ridgecrest parent meetings for 6 years. She told me quietly that she'd raised concerns about Dermot's handling of kids to the PTA chairperson 2 years ago. She'd been told that Dermot was one of the school's biggest assets for enrollment because parents chose Ridgecrest specifically for the athletic programs he ran. She'd been told to consider whether she was interpreting things correctly. I wrote down every word of every conversation. Names, dates, the specific things they told me, their willingness to go on record. 2 of the 3 said yes. The third asked for time. There was someone else I needed to talk to. Her name was Loretta Finch, and she had worked as a classroom aide at Ridgecrest for 14 years. Tyler had mentioned her once. She was the one who always had bandages in her desk drawer and never made kids feel embarrassed about needing them. I figured if anyone had seen something and stayed quiet, it was someone like her. I called the school and asked to leave a message for her. She called me back from her personal cell phone that evening. I know why you're calling, she said. She'd seen Dermot grab a second grader by the back of the neck in the hallway 2 years ago. She'd reported it to the principal, a man named Mr. Pruitt. Pruitt had told her that Dermot's after-school programs brought in over $40,000 annually in district grant funding and that unless she had stronger documentation, he'd appreciate her keeping the matter internal. She'd written a memo and put it in her personal file. She still had the copy. Would you be willing to speak at a school board meeting? I asked. Silence for a moment. Then, I have 4 years until retirement and a daughter in college. But I have been waiting 2 years for someone to ask me that question. Yes, the next board meeting was in 5 days. Franklin Adler helped us prepare. We organized the medical report, the photos, the personnel file request, the civil complaint reference, Loretta Finch's written account, and the statements from 2 other parents. We made copies. We made backup copies of the copies. Franklin walked me through how to present it so I was stating documented facts and not making claims I couldn't support in that room. The night of the meeting, the community room at the district office was packed. I found out later that someone had posted on the neighborhood Facebook group that something important was happening at the board meeting, and that was enough to fill every folding chair in the building. Warren Dermot was in the second row, dressed in a button-down shirt, sitting next to a man I didn't recognize who turned out to be his personal attorney. When public comment opened, I walked to the microphone. My name is Philip Ostrander. 6 days ago, my 8-year-old son showed me bruises on his body that a doctor has confirmed were caused by repeated physical force over multiple incidents. My son told me they were caused by Warren Dermot, the after-school athletic coordinator at Ridgecrest Elementary, who has been in that role for 11 years. The room got very still. I went through each piece of documentation. I didn't editorialize. I presented what I had found and let it sit there in front of the board. When I mentioned the civil complaint from 4 years ago and the settlement, the district superintendent, a man named Gerald Holt, leaned forward in his chair and said that was a personal matter and was not appropriate for public discussion. I said that it became appropriate for public discussion when the person at the center of it was still employed with unsupervised access to children 4 years later. Loretta Finch spoke next. Her voice was steady. She described what she had seen 2 years ago. She described the conversation with the principal. She said she was ashamed it had taken this long and she wanted that on the record. Then the 2 parents spoke. Then a third parent stood up, the one who'd asked for time, and described her daughter's bruised wrist and the vice principal's non-response. Dermot stood up at one point and said that these were distortions, that he had an 11-year record of service, that this was a coordinated attack by disgruntled parents. He said Tyler had behavior problems and had been spoken to about it multiple times. I said, my son is 8 years old and has documented injuries. Whatever he may have done on a soccer field does not explain compression bruising across his ribcage. The meeting went 2.5 hours. By the end, the board had voted to engage an independent investigator to remove Dermot from all school property effective immediately and to commission a review of the prior complaint and its resolution. 4 days after that, Officer Calloway called me again. His tone was different this time. Mr. Ostrander, I want to let you know we've reopened the investigation. After the board meeting, 2 additional families came forward independently. We've executed a search warrant on Mr. Dermot's home and his vehicle. He paused. I owe you an apology, and I owe your son one. I told him to save it for the courtroom. The search warrant turned up photographs on Dharmat's personal devices, documentation he had kept of interactions with students going back several years. It also turned up communications with another adult that investigators would not detail publicly but described in the arrest warrant affidavit as corroborative of the pattern of conduct alleged. Dermot was arrested on a Tuesday morning, 6.5 weeks after Tyler pulled up his jersey in a CVS parking lot. The charges were serious: multiple counts of child abuse, child endangerment, and a federal charge related to the material found on his devices. As the investigation expanded, more families came forward. Families whose children had been through Ridgecrest's after-school athletics over a span of 8 years. The final count of identified victims reached 14. Some of them were now in high school. 2 were in college. One mother called me and said her son had been in therapy for 3 years for anxiety and they had never known the origin of it until now. Gerald Holt, the superintendent, resigned 3 weeks after the board meeting once the civil complaint documentation revealed that the district's legal office had been aware of the prior settlement and had not disclosed it to the board. The principal Pruitt was placed on administrative leave and subsequently resigned. The vice principal who had dismissed the wrist injury complaint was reassigned. The trial took place 8 months later. Franklin Adler sat with us the whole way through it. Tyler did not have to testify in person. A child victim advocate recorded his statement in a neutral setting with toys and a support dog present, and that was entered into evidence. The defense tried to argue that the physical evidence was ambiguous and that the parents had coordinated a campaign against a man they disliked. The independent investigator the board had hired, a woman named Dr. Tonder, Patricia Morrow from Ohio State's School Safety Center, testified for 4 hours about the documented pattern and what the school records showed had been missed or suppressed. Dermot was convicted on 11 of the 14 counts. The judge sentenced him to 19 years without possibility of parole in the first 8. At sentencing, the judge said something I've carried with me since. She said that institutions protect themselves first and children second unless someone forces the order to change, and that what had happened at Ridgecrest was the consequence of that inversion going uncorrected for too long. Tyler started seeing a therapist named Dr. Nind Warren, no relation. I made sure to check before his first appointment, a child trauma specialist at a practice downtown. The first few months were hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. Tyler didn't have nightmares the way I expected. What he had was a kind of flatness. He'd be fine, and then someone would raise their voice in a normal way, and he'd just go somewhere else in his head. His therapist called it hypervigilance. She said it was the body doing exactly what it had learned to do to stay safe. She said healing doesn't look like forgetting. It looks like rebuilding trust one small moment at a time. We gave him a lot of small moments. By fall of that year, he'd joined a new soccer league at the YMCA, one that Caroline and I had vetted carefully. Different city, different coaches. We attended every practice for the first 2 months. He scored his first goal on a grey Saturday morning in October and turned to find me in the stands and threw both fists in the air. I held it together until the drive home. About a year after everything, Tyler and I were sitting on the back steps in the evening, watching the neighbor's dog run circles in the yard next door. He was 9 now. He'd shot up 2 inches. He was starting to look less like a little kid and more like the person he was becoming. Dad, he said, yeah, do you think I did the right thing, telling you? I turned to look at him. Do you? He thought about it for a second in the serious way he has. Yeah, I think so. It was scary, but I think so. Telling the truth when it costs you something, I said, is the only kind of brave that really counts. He nodded like he was filing that away somewhere. We sat there a while longer. The dog next door stopped running and lay down in the grass, panting. The light was going orange over the rooftops. A few weeks later, I got an email from one of the other families. Their son, who was 11 now and had been one of Dermat's early victims, had started volunteering with a peer mentoring program at his middle school. His parents said he'd told them he wanted to be the kind of person that younger kids could come to when something was wrong. They wanted me to know. They thought I'd want to know. I did. I still think about that CVS parking lot, about Tyler's voice from the back seat, quiet, careful, already half expecting to not be believed. I think about how easy it would have been for him to stay quiet, for me to drive home, make dinner, assume it was bruises from practice, for Loretta Finch to keep her head down 3 more years, for those other families to keep telling themselves it was probably nothing. None of us are heroes in this story. We're people who got to a point where staying silent cost more than speaking did. That's not bravery in the movie sense. It's just math. The cost of truth finally came in lower than the cost of carrying it alone. I've spoken at 2 district-level parent meetings since the trial, not because I have anything special to say, but because I'm someone who came out the other side. What I tell parents is simple. The moment you feel the instinct to explain away something your child tells you about an adult in their life, stop. Before you talk yourself out of it, before you think about the adult's reputation or your relationship with the school, just stop and listen, like what they're saying might be true, because it usually is. Children don't construct this kind of thing. They don't have the architecture for it. Your child will tell you something hard exactly once before they decide whether it's worth telling you again. Be the parent who makes it worth it. Caroline and I make it a point, every few months, to sit down with Tyler. Just the three of us, nothing on, nowhere to be, and ask him how things are going. Not how school is going. How things are going. He usually shrugs at first, the way kids do. Then he talks about what's bothering him, about what's good, about the weird social politics of fourth grade, which are apparently exhausting. It's the smallest thing. It costs us an hour. But I know that what I'm really doing is keeping that door open so that the next time something happens, because something will always happen, he knows exactly where to bring it. Loretta Finch retired last spring. She sent us a card. It said, "I wish I'd been braver sooner, but I'm glad I was brave when it mattered." Tyler drew a soccer ball in the margin when I let him beat it. He thought that was appropriate. He was right. I've thought a lot about the chain of events that led to Warren Darmart sitting in a courtroom. Not the dramatic parts, the board meeting, the arrest, the sentencing. The small ones, the ones that almost didn't happen. Tyler almost didn't say anything. He'd been carrying it for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of practice, of driving home, of dinner at the table, of me right there and him deciding, every single day, that it was safer to stay quiet. What changed on that Thursday wasn't his situation. It was some internal calculation I'll never fully understand. Some tipping point where the weight of carrying it alone finally exceeded the fear of what telling might cost him. That's not luck. That's a kid who, somewhere along the way, had been given enough reason to believe that his truth would be received with care. I'd like to think Caroline and I built that. I also know we could have done more. The honest version of this story includes the fact that I missed the signs for 6 weeks. That's the part I sit with. There's a version of this where Tyler stays quiet indefinitely, where the cost-benefit calculation he's running in the back seat comes out the other way, where I drive straight home, make spaghetti, ask about school, and Dermot walks into that gym again on Monday morning. That version existed. It was close. The only thing that separated it from what actually happened was a boy who decided, in a CVS parking lot, to say two words, pull over, and a father who pulled over and turned around and kept his voice steady. Actions produce consequences in exact proportion to what they are. Dharmat made a choice to use his position to harm children, and then he made 100 smaller choices to keep it hidden. The threats, the manufactured behavior records, the way he'd cultivated 11 years of community goodwill like a shield. Each of those choices didn't cancel out what he was doing. They compounded it. And on the other side, every person who chose to speak, Tyler, Loretta Finch, the parents who came forward one by one, those choices compounded too, in the opposite direction. That's not poetic justice. That's just how action works. You don't get to control the outcome, but the direction you push matters enormously. What I learned about raising a kid through something like this is that character isn't built in the crisis. It's built in the thousand ordinary moments before the crisis arrives. The times you listen when you're tired. The times you don't brush something off as a phase. The times you say I believe you about small things, so that when a big thing happens, your child already knows what your answer will be. Tyler had enough of those moments stored up to make a decision in a parking lot that changed 14 lives. Intelligence got us through the investigation, the research, the documentation, the personal records. Courage got us through the board meeting and everything that came after. But it was integrity, the slow accumulation of small, honest acts over years, that made Tyler willing to speak in the first place. And that made Loretta Finch finally answer a phone call she'd been waiting 2 years to receive. Those three things together, the willingness to think clearly, the willingness to act when it costs something, and the willingness to be honest even when dishonesty is easier. That's what actually moved this. Not any one moment, all of it, built up over time, arriving exactly when it was needed.